Good day and welcome to another edition of the Bindu Business Podcast. So usually on our episodes, we're actually talking to entrepreneurs, but I actually had an idea that sometimes entrepreneurs actually do get into relationships and they do want to get married. So with me today, I've got an expert in this matters, even though I'm sure she wouldn't like to be called an expert. I've got Ayeesha Moodley. How are you, Ayeesha?
Well, thanks, and yourself?
I'm good, thanks. So Ayeesha is actually, let me get the attorney, notary, and conveyancer, and she'll be here telling us, giving us more information on the types of marriages that are there in South Africa, so you can actually know which one to get into. That works good for you if you're actually an entrepreneur. If you and your partner are both entrepreneurs, or one of you is an entrepreneur. So this episode will actually give you more details into which type of marriages you can get into in South Africa. So Ayeesha, when did you actually decide to go into law?
So the story began when I was quite young. I started working at a law firm as a receptionist, and that's where the spark for law ignited. I then completed my LLB degree. It took me 10 years because life happened.
Yes.
And then I graduated. I served my articles. I was admitted as an attorney of the High Court in 2014. Mm-hmm. And then until recently, I was also admitted as a notary and a conveyancer.
Okay. And what's the difference between attorney, notary, and conveyancer?
Okay, so you have to be an attorney in order to be admitted as a notary and a conveyancer. An attorney is a general attorney in all aspects of law. A notary is one, for example, who will complete notarial contracts like an antenuptial contract, and a conveyancer does property transfers. That's the person you'll go to have your property transferred.
Okay, so if I'm in a bit of a, I don't know how to call it, in a bit of a quagmire late at night, some bottles were found in my car, can I call you?
Yes, that's where the attorney will come in, yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, so you're an all-rounder, basically.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, nice. Okay, so what type of marriage contracts do we have in South Africa?
Okay, in South Africa, there are three types of marriage contracts. It's the married in community of property, antenuptial contract with accrual, and an antenuptial contract without accrual.
Okay, and what's the difference? Let's start with the first one.
Okay, so if you do not complete an antenuptial contract, if you don't register an antenuptial contract, you are automatically married in community of property. So when you're married in community of property, you share in assets equally and you share in liabilities equally. It's basically 50-50. It's a joint estate that you form when you're married in community of property. And that's, of course, as I said, if you don't enter into an antenuptial contract.
Okay.
Then the next one is so that's marriage in community of property. Then you get marriage out of community of property. That's where the antenuptial contract, more commonly known as ANC, comes into place. And then there's two types. The first type is an ANC with accrual. In terms of that, your joint, it's not a joint estate, it's individual estate, but they accrue during the subsistence of the marriage. At the dissolution of the marriage, the spouse with a lower accrual has an accrual claim against the spouse with a higher accrual. Then the last one is ANC without accrual, which is the most common one that I've come across. And basically, you retain your individual assets. So what you come in is what you go out with. It's completely separate estates.
Okay. We are not prepared for the question I'm going to ask. But which marriage contract did you go with?
Without accrual. I've been married for 21 years.
Yes.
And at the time when I got married, I actually didn't even understand what the three types of marriage contracts were. I wasn't even nowhere close to even thinking about becoming a notary or conveyancer.
Yes.
But that's the marriage contract that I am in.
Without accrual?
Yes.
Okay. And actually just want to... People think discussing this before their marriage is kind of like... I don't know, it's like you are like thinking
Preempting,
divorce already. Yes.
Not at all. It's actually very wise to think about it because you have to protect your assets. You have to think about the future, and it's a very important. And if you look at, in my personal experience, my husband is a businessman as well, and he has to complete forms and stuff for the bank, and they always ask you in contracts, how are you married? It actually plays a very, very important role in terms of business. So it's something that couples should definitely consider, because once you married in communal property, and also with the other thing with the antenuptial contract is it has to be completed before you actually get married, and it must be registered within 3 months. So we register in the deeds office,
Okay.
and it must be registered within 3 months of its signing, and it must be completed prior to the marriage. That's very important. It cannot be completed after, because then you're automatically in the marriage in communal property.
Okay. Is it possible later at a later stage to change my marriage contract?
It is possible, but it's like a high court application and all of that, so it's quite complicated. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That answers a lot. So if we've got loans in a community of property, if we're married in community of property, and we've got, and let's say you had a loan before we got married. I'm trying to think of a large amount here. Let's just say you had a loan of 1 million per se. You are into business, and I, your partner, am not into business. So what happens when we get married? Am I also liable for that loan?
Definitely, you are 50% liable for that. That's what a marriage in community of property is. It's a joint estate. You become liable for that debt. So you share in the debt of your spouse.
Even the debts that you had before we met.
Yes, because remember, when you get married, your estate now is no longer a single estate. It's a joint estate.
Oh, okay.
And it's also assets that you may have acquired prior to your marriage. Once you married, your spouse is entitled to that asset. Yes.
I'm not sure. I'm not very knowledgeable about law, which is why I have you here. So let's say I'm a multi-billionaire. I'm the South African Jeff Bezos. So I get married to Denisha. Come up with a name like Denisha. I get married to a lady named Denisha. And it's actually a very short-lived marriage, about a couple of months.
Yeah.
And she divorces me. Does she get half of the billions? What happens in that case?
Of course she does. If there was no antenuptial contract entered into, for sure she does.
So it doesn't matter the length of the marriage or how long we've been married?
No.
Whew, okay.
So it's quite a repercussion.
Yes. Okay. Wow. This is actually worse than I thought. Okay. And being married, how does marriage affect my pension if I'm someone who works 9 to 5? I work at a company and I've got this money that's in my pension. How does me being married in community or without or out of community of property affect my pension?
Okay, let's talk about being married in community of property. As we said, it's a joint estate, so your partner is entitled to 50% of your pension. So at the dissolution of the marriage, you would be required to pay out, your company would be required to pay out 50% of your pension fund or provident fund to your spouse. That's in terms of community of property. So with the antenuptial contract, when you enter into an antenuptial contract with accrual, you are actually allowed, if I may say, you have the option to exclude certain assets.
Oh, okay.
So just say you have already acquired 3 properties, for example, and your spouse doesn't, and you don't want your spouse to actually, you don't want those properties to form part of the accrual. Just like that, you would exclude them. So you would exclude them in your antenuptial contract itself. So at dissolution, those properties are not taken into account. They don't form part of the accrual. Same with the provident fund. You can exclude your provident fund. So if you excluded it initially upfront, then your spouse won't lay claim to it. But if you didn't exclude it, it will form part of the accrual when they're calculating it.
Okay,
Okay?
perfect. Yes.
And then the last one is obviously if there's no accrual, then that pension fund or provident fund remains yours, because what's yours is yours and what's hers is hers, or vice versa.
Perfect. So in the scenario you gave, let's say we get married in 2010 and our marriage is from 2010 to 2020. So I think that's 10 years. So when we get into this marriage, I'm able to actually exclude some of my assets.
Definitely. You just give me a list of your assets and we exclude it in the contract.
Can I exclude
itself.
everything?
You can. That's your prerogative. Yes.
Oh,
And then you also start with a net commencement value of your estate. Most couples start at null to keep it clean, and especially if they're excluding assets, then there's no estate to actually start with. So you start with a null value, and then you exclude whatever you need to. Couples exclude properties, vehicles, pension funds. I had recently a client that asked about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and sort of or all sort of that. Yeah, you exclude it.
Oh, okay.
So that's obviously prior to your marriage, and you want to exclude it. Then whatever you accrue during the marriage is what will actually be used to calculate your accrual.
Oh, okay. And the laws, I don't know what we call them, the marriage contracts actually. Do they also apply to same-sex marriages?
Yes, they do. Same-sex marriages are governed by the Civil Union Act. So you will you will enter into a marriage in terms of the civil union, and your antenuptial contract will be completed in the same way. Yes.
Okay. And what if I'm getting married traditionally? I think it's a customary marriage.
Yes,
I'm not quite
they
sure.
are recognized in terms of the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act.
Okay. So can I still also prepare, what is this thing called? Sorry, I'm looking for the word here. Can I also prepare an antenuptial
Contract, yes, an ANC, yes.
even if I'm getting married traditionally?
Because remember, you still have to register your marriage at Home Affairs. So before you do that, you complete your contract.
Okay.
And then normally what happens is that you would consult with the notary, myself, about 3 or 4 months before the marriage. And then the contract would be drafted, and then you will sign before the marriage. And then as a notary would give you a letter that you give to your marriage officer to say that you have completed an antenuptial contract. And then that will be handed over to Home Affairs to actually register your marriage in terms of South African law.
Okay, so the best thing, whether you want to get married traditionally or have a white wedding, the best thing to do is to actually give you a call.
Before all of that actually happens, yes.
Oh, okay. I've had stories of people who want to get married and, someone brings up this issue that, what, I want us to have such a marriage contract. And the other partner goes like, why? Are you planning a divorce?
It's not that. It's definitely not about that. It's just about being practical, I think.
Okay. Have you had any cases where maybe someone had assets and they didn't declare them in the community of property? So you don't declare your assets when you get married in community of property, right?
No, you don't.
But during divorce, what if someone has hidden assets during the divorce?
It's not possible to hide assets.
It is possible. So if I've got, I'm trying to actually just think of a scenario here. So, okay. So if I've got cars which are in my name, but someone else is driving this car, let's say maybe I've just given it to my sister or so. My mother and my sister have bought cars for all of them. The cars are still in my name. So when we divorce, they're actually also part of these assets that we are dividing between the two of us.
Remember that there's something called an e-NATIS for vehicles that you can run on a person's ID number. And for property, there's something called a deeds office that you can put a person's ID number and pick up on all the properties. But the attorney will
Okay.
Notary will pick up on all of that, will do the relevant
Okay.
investigation. And I'm sure your spouse would be aware. I wouldn't imagine that you'd go through an entire marriage with your spouse not
You'd be
knowing.
surprised. You'd be surprised.
Maybe, perhaps.
Yes. Okay. Usually, in the cases that we've seen, Jeff Bezos actually being one of those cases. I think even Bill Gates was getting divorced or is in the process of getting divorced. But in the current, in the way the world is going now, you also get women who are actually more financially what's the word?
Stable.
Yes, more financially stable than men. Women who actually have a higher net worth than the men in the marriage. So, in your experience, have you met cases where the man was dependent on the woman, and during divorce, then they actually want, 50% of the assets or anything like that?
Yes, traditionally back in the day, women were always dependent on men, but in the economy that we're living in, you find that men are financially dependent on women. I haven't personally come across the matter yet, but men will definitely have an accrual claim against a woman. It's the same thing as how the estates grew during, and obviously if there was an antenuptial contract concluded, and if the woman has a higher accrual, then she would have to pay an accrual claim to the man.
Okay, but then, so it's all about who has more, right?
Yes, who accrued more during the
Okay.
subsistence of
Let's say
the
we are
marriage.
married.
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to actually get to a point where there's not much of a difference between us. I'm thinking in a case, let's say maybe I'm earning 15,000
Yes.
and you're earning 18,000.
Yes.
So not much, there's not much of an accrual difference between us.
Okay, so the total growth of each spouse, they factor in CPI. This is how the accrual is calculated. Then after working out who has the highest growth, the accrual entitlement is 50% of the growth. So if there's I know the scenario you're talking about 15,000, 18,000. We're looking at salaries only, but it's
Yes.
everything in
Well,
taken
almost
into
the
account.
same assets
Yeah,
though.
then it'll be a small accrual, but there will be some accrual and there will be something payable. If not, if it's much of nothing, it depends then on the spouse. Whether they, you can forfeit your accrual. You can say it's not worth it, and then you don't want to claim.
Okay. And the other thing, just to bring it back to business, right? If I'm applying for a business loan and you have a bad credit record, we are married, and let's just say your credit record is bad, you are blacklisted and everything. We are married in community of property, and I want a business loan. So when I go to apply for that business loan, do they also need to check your credit or just my credit only?
Definitely, if you're married in community or property, you can't do anything without spousal consent. So a loan is a very good example of that. You must have your spousal consent in order to apply for a loan. And because it's a joint estate and it's 50-50, it will affect your application for a loan. You could have a fantastic credit record and your spouse can have a very bad record. I'm not saying this is why they'll decline your loan, but they have to take into account your spouse's credit record. Yeah.
Okay. I personally actually know a couple who actually went through a separation. I don't know if they actually completed the divorce because the other spouse, the man, unfortunately was...
Didn't disclose?
No, he was bad financially. I think it was
Yes.
maybe before the marriage or so. He had taken out a whole lot of loans and he wasn't paying that.
Yeah.
And they got married in community of property. And the lady was actually even unable to buy a car or something along
Yes.
those lines. So it's actually important to
Yes.
actually get into the right type of marriage contract because it affects your financial decisions and your financial well-being in the future.
Yes, you will get saddled with debts that you were not even. You'll often find widows or widowers. After the death of their spouse, they are saddled with debts that they were not even liable for. Like but they are responsible for it.
Okay.
by virtue of their marriage in community of property.
Okay, let's make an example here to take it out of the law terms. So we are married. I go and I buy this expensive Range Rover. So we're married in community of property. So we are both liable for that debt, right?
Yes.
So when I pass on, let's just say I get into not an accident, but let's just say I get ill and I pass on, and the car is still there. So that debt now all falls on you.
Yes. Well, it falls in the joint estate because
Yes.
remember your estate needs to be wound up, but it will be a debt of the estate, of the joint estate.
Okay, so that debt you are now liable for that debt.
Yes. So it's a joint estate and you are 50% liable for the debt and the deceased estate is 50% liable. Because it's a joint estate, it forms part of that estate when winding up the estate.
Okay.
So you ultimately become responsible for the debt.
Is there anything I can do to protect myself from being liable in this case if I'm already married in community of property? I'm just assuming that a lot of people are actually already married in community of property because they were unaware of things like this.
So shall I tell you my personal experience?
Yes.
My husband and I were initially married in community of property, and we actually got divorced and remarried.
Okay.
It's more common than you think. He didn't want me. So when you get married via antenuptial contract, you are protected in terms of sequestration if anything happens to your partner. So he was going into business and he didn't want me to be
liable for.
Yes, so your creditors can't go against your spouse. Your spouse is
Yes.
protected in terms of an antenuptial contract.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not telling couples who are married in community or property to divorce and remarry. I'm just saying from my personal experience, that's what we did.
Okay. Quite interesting. Something else that I heard about a couple of years back, I think it was 2 years back or so, that couples are actually divorcing just so they can have access to their pension.
I've heard that as well.
Yes. How does that work? So it only works if we're married in community of property, I assume.
50%, yes.
Yes. Okay. So we get divorced so we can. Okay. How does it work? I know this is probably not your specialty.
Yeah.
But how does it work that I am married? By the way, this is not advice for someone who wants to do this.
Yes.
Okay. But how does it work? I just want to understand the whole process. So immediately after divorce, do we get access to our pension? What happens?
Yes, so there will be a claim. So when you apply for divorce, normally you'd have a settlement agreement that you agree on. And in terms of the settlement agreement, well, definitely there are terms you will decide on the assets and what have you. But in terms of the settlement agreement, especially in terms of a provident fund, it's a 50%. So I have a client that's divorcing at the moment, that's married in community of property. And in terms of the divorce settlement agreement, he's still obviously working for the company. She is entitled to 50% of that. So upon the granting of the divorce, that 50% will have to be paid over to her.
Okay, perfect. So as an entrepreneur, what marriage contract would you advise someone to take? If I'm getting married and I'm an entrepreneur, I want to take loans in the future. I'm going to have assets. Excuse me. So there might be chances of me going bankrupt in the future or anything along those lines. What marriage contract protects my spouse and my family from all the bad things out there that might happen?
So definitely a marriage out of community of property, not in community of property. But when it comes to deciding whether you want it with accrual or without accrual, that's a personal choice. Either way, your spouse will be protected.
Oh,
Because an antenuptial contract does that. It protects your spouse. It doesn't matter whether it's with accrual or without accrual. As long as you're married out of community or property, you're protected.
Okay.
So it's a personal choice whether you want the marriage with accrual or without accrual.
Okay. In getting married out of community of property, I think a lot of people don't know how to start or where to start. So let's say I'm getting married planning to get married in December. Now it's still August. So I think there's enough time for me to
Yeah.
do the contract, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely, I would suggest at least 3 or 4 months, because there's a lot of questions that I have a client that's now it's like 8 weeks and they're still deciding what to exclude, whether to exclude or not. So there's a lot of thought process behind it. So as not to rush the process, you should give yourself at least 3 or 4 months. Look, you can even sign your antenuptial contract the day before the wedding, but ideally that's not what you want to do, because it's a big decision. You want to think about it carefully before you actually sign the contract.
Okay. So in my assets, right, do we also count things like pets?
No.
No. So when we divorce, can't I keep the dog? I just want to.
I haven't had such a request. No. Would
But-
you regard a pet? It's like a child. Would you regard a child as an asset? I don't think
Well,
so.
but it's something I own.
No, I don't think that would form part of an exclusion. It's a new one. I haven't come across that before.
But okay, we've been married in community of property, so we are now dividing our assets by half, right?
But a pet is not an asset, is it?
Well, but we selling everything, the house and everything.
That would form part of your redistribution agreement when you're doing your draft divorce order.
Okay. Oh, so we sit down with the
Yes, we
attorneys
say
and
we're taking this, I'm taking this, you taking this. So even though these have been accrued during the subsistence of the marriage, you do your redistribution agreement and you agree on what you're taking and what she's taking. I suppose that is where the pet would come in.
Oh, okay. Because look, I've watched a lot of movies.
I know.
Which is why I'm having some of these questions.
I believe the pet is a big thing when people divorce.
Yes. So let's say we've got a house which is 750,000, and someone wants to keep the house, and the other partner wants to sell the house. How are these situations usually resolved?
So in terms of that, you can buy out your partner's share, and then you just do a transaction in the deeds office. For that, you'd see a conveyancer to buy out your partner's half share, or you can do it in terms of a court order, where you say that there's an endorsement called a Section 45 B endorsement, where you endorse that which partner is taking over, and the title deed will be endorsed accordingly in the deeds office.
Okay, so it's either I buy out the other person.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And with I'm not quite sure how this works, but which is why you're here. What if I'm a polygamist? Can I marry my first wife in community, the second wife out of community? How does it work? I've never had such a case before.
So it all falls under the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. If you are married, your first marriage shouldn't affect your second marriage, because you are allowed in terms of the Recognition of Customary Marriage. Polygamy is a thing in South Africa, so it shouldn't affect your different marriages. Shouldn't actually affect how you're getting married, but it will affect your assets at the end of the day, if there's dissolution. Obviously, in a marriage, your first marriage is in a community of property. Half your estate is yours only, and the other half belongs to the first wife. And then you get married in terms of the antenuptial contract. Your estate is only 50%, so you start with the net commencement value of 50% of your estate.
Okay, so
the second wife doesn't have claim to the full estate because it's already
50%.
Yes.
Okay, that explains it, because actually he just had a question of what happens if they are both married if it's me and two wives. Let's say I've got two wives and we're both married in community of property with these wives. what happens when I divorce the first one? Does she take 50% of
Yes.
everything?
Yes.
Shouldn't it be 25%? Because look, it's me and two wives. So the first wife, she got 50% of what I had. So when I go get married again for the second time, I'm only coming with 50%
Yes.
of what I have.
Yes.
Okay, no,
Yes.
it's fine. That
Yeah.
clears it up. It's a whole lot of mathematics,
It
which
is. It's quite complicated. Yeah.
okay. But in some of the cases that you've had, what's usually the main disagreement that couples have if they're married in community of property? What are the main fights about?
Well, I'm a notary, so I don't really get involved with the marriage in community of property. That would be for a divorce attorney.
Okay. Oh yes.
You would come to me only if you're completing an antenuptial contract, right?
Okay.
So the question for me, if couples come to me, is with accrual or without accrual.
Oh, okay, perfect. And I think I actually cut you off when you're explaining the whole process. So first things first, I give you a call.
Yes.
Then we actually discuss which contract I should take, I assume.
Yes. So usually with the clients, I would explain the difference between ANC with accrual and ANC without accrual. And generally, couples have in their mind already, they've already pre-discussed it with each other, what type of marriage contract they want. So they would immediately tell you, no, I want a marriage without accrual. And then there's a form that I will send to them to complete with all the information that I require. So that if there's assets they're excluding, for example, their personal details, they'll complete it, send it to me. I'll draft the contract, make an appointment for them to sign. Then it's lodged. I give them the letter for their marriage officer to say they've completed a contract. And then I lodge it at the deeds office. And then once it's lodged, it usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks. Then that contract comes back, and then I keep a copy in what I call my protocol. And then the original gets filed with them.
Okay, and then we can go and get married at Home Affairs.
You can actually, once you've completed it and you have your wedding, nothing stops you. You don't have to wait for the contract. That letter is sufficient.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
perfect. So we just take that letter
Yes.
to the.
Yes, together with the marriage certificate that the marriage officer would give you.
Okay,
Yeah.
and just like that, the marriage is done.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. In your personal experience, you've said initially you were married in community of property, right? How did the dividing of assets go, if you don't mind me asking?
We never really divided our assets. There wasn't a need for it because we were remarrying.
Oh, okay. Oh, but there is. So I'm assuming that the process for me to change my marriage from community of property to something else is a very tedious.
Indeed, it is. Yeah. There's a lot of repercussions. I mean, divorce is not something that you just easily take into account, but we had our reasons why we were doing it. So it was a mutual understanding. So there was no reason for redistribution of the assets.
Oh yes, it was just to get married out of community of property. And when you got married initially the first time, I'm assuming that you didn't even know about.
No, I didn't. I was quite young. I was 21 years old.
So you just went to the Home Affairs office and you signed.
We actually didn't. We got married at home, and we had the marriage officer come and say,
Oh, okay.
do you take this woman and do you take this man? And
Yes.
and then we got a marriage certificate, and then, yeah, it was registered at Home Affairs.
Okay, perfect. And when did you start realizing that, okay, we took the wrong type of marriage contract?
I think when my husband decided he wanted to go into business, then he wanted to protect me, and that was one of the reasons. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And how do people get hold of you if they actually want to maybe consider getting married and choosing the right type of contract?
Okay, I am available on my cell phone number.
Okay, no, it's fine. I'll put that down there.
Okay,
It's fine.
and then I have an email address as well.
Okay, it's
You
fine.
can
I'll
contact
put
me.
those details there. So I just give you a call and we discuss it. Okay, perfect. Don't tell me the right amount, but some people are thinking that getting is it an attorney or notary who does this?
Notary, yes.
Notary. Someone is probably assuming that this is for rich people.
No, it's not for rich people. It's well, I can tell you what I charge for
Okay.
for an
Just give
antenuptial
me
contract. It's
a.
an all-inclusive amount of 5,000.
Okay.
So that would include the consultations before consultation to sign, drafting of the contract, and lodging it at the deeds office.
Okay, that's actually quite affordable. I mean, someone is probably thinking this thing costs 20,000, 30,000
No, not at
somewhere there.
all.
So it's actually quite cheap.
And
And
it's an all-inclusive fee, so there's nothing over and above that you pay.
yes, in your experience, are people actually getting married more in out of community of property now? Are people being aware
Yes,
of
because
this?
they are becoming aware. As I said, it's b- back in the day. The marriage to get into was in community of property because you automatically got into married in community of property if you didn't complete an antenuptial contract. But people are aware. I think there is awareness out there. They're just not sure whether it's with accrual or without accrual. But once you explain it to them, then as I said, they have an idea, and then they go that way.
Oh, okay.
And it's very, very important. If you, as an entrepreneur, you'd know that there are always applications, forms that you're completing. They are asking that question more and more. How are you married? And if ANC, is it with or without accrual? Because it's very important for them to assess the situation, before they actually go into business with you, give you a loan.
Okay. So
Credit.
okay. So when my credit is being checked, for example, do they also check the partner's one? How does it affect mine?
If you're married
COP.
yes, they definitely check your partner's credit. I don't know how they score you or what have you, but remember it is a joint estate, so they will have to see, whether if you're unable to pay your loan, whether the joint estate can afford to pay it.
Oh, okay. Someone was actually doing their taxes. It's tax season, by the way. So someone was doing their taxes, and there's a little section where it asks if they are married, community of property or so. So that person was owing. So luckily for the wife, she was not liable to that debt because they are not married in community of
Yes, they're not.
property.
Yeah, if you're married in antenuptial contract, there's no reason to normally if you're married in community of property, you've got to divulge your spouse's income and expenditure, assets and liabilities. That's not necessary at all if you're married in antenuptial contract because it's your estate.
Yes.
It's an individual estate and it has to do with you and not your spouse.
Okay.
all.
So I actually came across a story yesterday. Someone it's a businessman, and they actually owe the taxman a lot of money. So their items were getting repossessed, couches, TVs, and everything. So what happens if I'm married in community of property? In that case, do they also go after some of my wife's assets as well?
Yes, because it's not her asset; it's form part of the
Ours.
joint estate.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm getting a headache just by thinking about this because it seems there's a whole lot of consequences
Definitely, they
behind
are.
it. Okay. No, thanks a lot, Ayeesha, for helping us out. Is there anything maybe you feel I left out which I didn't ask?
I think we've covered everything.
Yes, I'm just actually hoping that this information is actually worth it to someone out there. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're actually thinking about getting married, so this would be an episode for you to watch so you can get more information on marriages in South Africa and how they actually affect your business as well. Okay. Thanks a lot for coming, Ayeesha.
Thank you
It's
for
been a
having
pleasure.
me.
Cool. Cheers. Bye.